So good evening, everyone, and good morning to Marco. I'm very excited for this session as a few months ago, I think maybe we were already reaching a year, Marco, that we met each other. Funny enough, we're both Dutch, but it took 18,000 kilometers to meet each other through a shared connection. So that is funny how small the world suddenly is. But it's great having you here. When I met Marco, quite quickly, it was very apparent to me that we had a big shared passion, and that is everything that has to do with people, mindset, and behavior. And I asked him, I said, well, in New Zealand, we're doing all this agile stuff, but I think New Zealand can have some more insights in how to interact and connect with people, as most organizations tend to focus on money and shares and dividends and everything in there. So he was delighted to do this for us. So I'm very happy to have you here, Marco. Thank you so much. And I will keep it short as I promised you. So off to you.
Well, thank you so much. And I'm absolutely delighted to be here as well. And I'm happy. And I know it's only 1 hour because this is such a topic, an important topic to talk about the human behavior and how to interact. And we could actually spend hours and days on it. So rather than giving you all the tricks on how to do it and how to connect with people, I think it's truly important to talk about the mindset towards people, the importance of also making connections to people. Also in your line of work, you know, when you're working as an agile coach, for instance, of course, we can focus on the procedures, we can focus on the methodology, and that's important as well. Yet I will show you also through my 1 hour presentation that the doing part of it is important, but maybe the being part is even more important. So that's also why I raised and said, like, you know, the title, are you a human doing or a human being? And I will show you there's a paradox. I hope your answer is I'm both. And at the same time, I hope that you will be a little bit more of the being than the doing part. When you have any questions during this 1 hour session, feel free to jump in. You know, as it's not such a large group, I would say just unmute yourself, you switch on your video, and feel free to interrupt me and just ask the questions. And then we can have a little bit of a conversation around it. I prepared a PowerPoint. I will send the PDF afterwards as well to you, Marcella, so you can just, you know, pass it on to each and every one.
Yes, awesome.
So make
Thanks.
so make screenshots if you like, but just know you will get the PDF. So let's get going here. Let me share the screen. Now you should be able to see the screen, is it? I love this quote by Dr. Seuss. For those who are not familiar with Dr. Seuss, well, you know, it's a person, he passed away. It was not his original name, but he wrote children's books. So what I always suggest to people when you're planning to do some more training, of course, you can read a lot of books about agile coaching and so on. But what if you would read some books by Dr. Seuss? Because he's so powerful, his words. And I love specifically this quote. Today you are you. That is truer than true. There's no one alive who's youer than you. And to me, that is so fundamental. That's the invitation just to be yourself, your beautiful self, with your strengths, your weaknesses, your powerful knowledge, as well as also being unaware about what you know or what you don't know. And it also invites you to not only speak from your head with your wisdom, but also to speak from your heart with all your intuition and your gut feelings. So let's get going in the sensations here. I don't want to influence you with a story, so I'm going to show you the paradox between the doing and the being. And I don't want to influence you with the story, so I want to get started with a question here. If you think about the best team that you've been part of, and I mean the best, and you can define your own best team. It might be the team where you have the highest salary or the biggest bonus. Or the best might also be a sports team where you say, like, you know, we were average if you would look at the ranking list, but hey, we were the best for whatever reason. Now, if you compare that best team, it might be a sports team, you might be in your current business team, it might be a previous business team, it might be a group of volunteers. So you can really think of any team and any way you define best. But if you compare that best team to the average teams that you've also been part of, or maybe even the low performing teams, and the question is, what stands out in those best performing teams? What are the attributes that made that the best team experience compared to the average teams or the low performing teams? So may I ask you, invite you to use the chat just to write down some of those answers, and probably you will have multiple answers. But please write down what are the attributes that really stands out in the best teams compared to the average teams or the low performing teams. And by the way, whatever the answer is, it's absolutely right because it's your answer. It's your experience. So please use the chat to just start writing like 2 or 3, maybe 4 of those attributes. And we're going to play with those attributes later. And again, there's no right or wrong. It's your answer. It's your experience. And you will see there will be a paradox in those answers as well, but I'm going to show you later. So I see more answers coming in. That's really great to see. Let me just take the chat here. I can already see some of yours working their own silos. That's low. Yeah. So if you flip it around, it's like really collaboration probably. You accepted each other's weaknesses, played to each other's strengths. Fantastic. Human connection, respect, collaboration, energy, joy. Right, good. There's a lot of answers. So thank you so much for the answers. If there's more answers during the presentation, always feel free to add. And again, this is all true because you said it's true. It's your experience. I'll come back to it later. So let me do a little bit of an introduction here on myself as well. If I were to introduce myself, my name is Marco Buschman, MCC. MCC, by the way, stands for I'm a Master Certified Coach by the ICF, the International Coach Federation. So that's the golden standard, and it's the highest level. I think nowadays 2,000 people globally are owning the credentials. So I'm really deep in my profession. I know a lot about humans, human behaviors, human interactions. If I were to introduce, I could introduce myself from 2 angles. This is the first introduction. This is what I would call the human doing part. This is what I do. I am an executive coach. I'm a team coach. I am a partner, managing partner at Curious. I've written several books. I'm a facilitator. I love to speak to audiences and to inspire people all over the world. So here's some of the names of clients I work with, like big clients, but also smaller clients. So this is all the things that I do. I would not say that defines who I am. It's not my identity, although I highly relate to what I do, but it's not my identity. But this is also part of, if I were to introduce myself, this is part of what I would say a little bit more the being part, or a little bit more personal. So I'm a proud father to 3 kids, Laura, Frank, and Erin, 26, 25, and 18. I'm married to Cindy. I love to dance. I love to dance. I love to go to festivals, but I also do meditation. I love to do the sports. Every month I take a massage. So in order also to take good care of my body. Why? Because the job that I'm in also demands quite some energy, and I assume it's the same for you. And when you're in a job that demands some energy, then the question is now, how do you also build your own energy? So these are some of the things that I do. And I must admit that taking cold showers during the winter is not always like my preference. During the summer, I'm absolutely okay. During the winter, I do half cold showers, let's put it this way. So just think about, like, what is your way of getting yourself energized and to keeping yourself energized? Now, if you look at those introductions also have value, the doing as well as the being. So if you look at Stephen M.R. Covey, so there's Stephen Covey, The 7 Habits, and he's got a son called Stephen M.R. Covey. So I'm not sure if you're familiar that he has a son. And his son has written a book, The Speed of Trust. And what I love about The Speed of Trust, it shows again like the importance of the doing and the being. about being a powerful thought engine with IQ, but also being a powerful human being. Why? He says, like, if you want to build up trust, the fastest way to build up trust is show that you have the competences and show that you create results. I always say, if you apply for a job, you send in your resume and people say like, oh, okay, that might be interesting. We might want to work with you. Or if you're working independently and you want to work for a customer, then, it's good that your LinkedIn profile also shows that you have the experience, that you've done the agile work with other companies as well. And therefore they might be interested to work with you as well. So it definitely has meaning to talk about the functions and to talk about the doing part, to show you have the competence and the results. Now, what Stephen M. R. Covey also says, like, if you want to deepen the trust, it's much more about the person. It's much more about the character. It is, what is your intention? How do you show up? Well, what's the intent? Is the intent to show your ego? Look, I'm good, I'm powerful, I'm smart. Or is your intent really like, I want to support you, I want to inspire you, I want to see how I, with my skills, can contribute to a better solution for your company, or becoming more professional in whatever way. And next to it, he also says, are you working and coming from integrity? So is it also that you say what you want to do and that you actually do it, and that you also afterwards admit what you've done, also if you haven't done it? So he further says as well that these elements, these are the 4 core elements of creating trust. But it also says, like, if you play a foul game on the person part, the character, the being part, you can lie for once, you can lie twice, but then at some point people say, you're out. I don't trust you anymore. So that's also what they say, trust, you build it up slowly, but it can really move away fast. And again, you see the doing and the being part. Both of them are, again, equally important, and maybe not, but we'll get there. Now, I also promised you to talk about the connection quotient, since we're talking about relationships. And I've written this book, The Connection Quotient. This year, we're going to release a 2nd edition in the Netherlands. We're already at the 7th edition. And in this, I've also explored what does it mean to create connections. Now, if you will start reading the book, you will never find a definition of a connection, because connection is really hard to define. I've asked many people, like, so what is a connection? What's that all about? And people come up with things like, there's the foundation of trust, as we discussed. So you can look at Stephen M. R. Covey or David Meister. People say, like, it's a fundamental thing. And I say, yes, it is fundamental, connections. Ultimately, you and I, we're all born out of a connection between 2 people. A male and a female, and 2 cells got together. That connection created, like, the bodies that we are and the people that we are. Also, if you look at the research, connection is so fundamental. People join a company because they love the company, they fall in love with the product or the culture. But you know what? Many people also, they leave because of their managers, because they lack the connection with their manager. And again, research by a US-based company has shown this. They've done the research for the last 30, 35 years. And it constantly shows, like, if there's no connection, at some point people will leave. So from my perspective, I would say we don't need to define connection. You and I, we know when the connection is there. Marcelo, the first time that we met, we were not just walking heads and talking heads that connected, but we connected also with our hearts, from who you are and who I am. And that created that vibrant energy that led us also to invite me here for this session. So you see, connection is something that is not just only like a heady thing, but it's something that you can sense within the body. It's there. I always compare it to like breathing. You do not think about your breathing, is it? But you're breathing the whole day, constantly, many times. And it's the same with the connection. You create connections, you feel, you sense connections constantly, but you're not aware of it. Yes, you do become aware when it's constrained. For instance, when also with the breath, there's a fire next to you, a lot of smoke, you suddenly realize that breathing becomes harder, and therefore you're aware of the breath. Or, when COVID hit, when you had COVID or long COVID, for those people, they suddenly were aware about the importance of breath and that there was something not working in the breath. And that's the same with the connection. When it's there, we take it for granted. But at some point, we start noticing when it starts drifting away. So, for instance, also in your friendships, suddenly you start noticing that you're not willing to drive 100 kilometers anymore to visit someone. You go like, you know what, I've got better things to do. Or you're not willing to answer the cell phone anymore at some point. So the same is with connection. We don't need to define it. We know if it's there or if it's not there. But then the fundamental question comes up, like, if the connection is hard to define, there's so many elements that contribute to the sensation of feeling connected. Then how do you want to build the connection? And how do you want to create a connection quotient then? I think, therefore, we have to look at connection through a different lens. Now, if I would define connection and ask people to define connection, what I notice in their answers is mostly they also define connection as something that is happening between you and me. So, for instance, Beth, if we would start to have a conversation, we might start feeling a connection between you and me. And that is all true. But I think the true starting point for connections is not between people. The true starting point for connection is, how are you firstly connected to yourself? Do I know who I am? If I were to ask me, who are you? Then the question is, what will be your answer? Do you define yourself by the role you're in, by the work that you're doing? Or do you define yourself also by, your beliefs, your values, and your experiences? I hope you do both. So it starts really by, how are you connected with yourself? And from there, how do you connect with someone else as the first representative of the outside world? And from there to a group of people, which we will call a team or organization, or even how do you connect with the rest of the world? So it's a different angle on looking on connections, but there's more that I would love you to know. If I and my colleagues, if we look at organizations and teams and functions, and when we do either the coaching, executive coaching, or team development work, or leadership development work, we always look at organizations, teams, and functions through two lenses. The first lens is, I would call it the functional lens. It's much more IQ based. Why? Every organization, every team, every function exists to produce results. Agile Auckland exists because there are people who are in a demand, who want to be inspired on themes that are related to Agile. And therefore, Agile Auckland exists. Otherwise, if people would not be interested, it's interesting, but it would be finished. So that's the same with your role. In your role as an Agile coach, within the organization or as an independent, there are companies who are in need of your services. So this is also from an IQ standpoint. This is where you start thinking about, what is actually our vision? What is our strategy? What is our business model? What are the procedures? What are the methodologies? What are the tasks, the roles, responsibilities? How do we do decision-making processes and so on? If you look at Agile, there's so many methodologies around it as well. That is all, I would say, the functional part of it. So in other words, this is what I would say, this is you as a leader or as an Agile coach, as a role. It's a role. It's not who you are. It's the role that you perform. It's the human doing part. Now, the second lens that we always look at organizations, teams, and functions is much more about the human part. And I know artificial intelligence, machine learning, and so on, it's building. If you just look at what AI nowadays can do, it's incredible. So it might be that in 20 or 25 years from now, that most of the organizations don't exist out of humans like you and me, that more and more robots or more and more technology is taking over. But at least for now, although I cannot see everyone, but I guess that underneath all those names, there are humans, although your video is not switched on. We're humans. So the second is much more, how do we relate? Organizations, teams, and functions exist out of humans. And when you get humans together, this is also where the dynamics kicks in. This is where we say we're all diverse, and diversity doesn't mean male and female. It's not about religion, but we all are born and raised in different ways. We all had different backgrounds on different values from our family or different cultures. We also had different experience in primary, secondary school, universities, which also created the diversity. You know, we had good experience, bad experiences. So by definition, we're all diverse. And that's also why I say diversity is a fact. Inclusion, though, is an action, and the result is belonging, the sense of belonging, the sense that you belong to a group, to a team. So this is where we start to talk about trust, respect, psychological safety, inclusion, and so on. Or you might say, in order to do so, it means that you, as a leader or an agile coach, you are a person. You need to relate from person to person, not only from head to head, functional, but also from person to person. And in my perception, agile, agile is, there are a lot of mythologies, but ultimately agile to me is a mindset that you bring into an organization, a way of looking, a way of collaboration, a way of working together, and it's supported by methodologies and structures and so on, and not the other way around. Although I do see some people who think implementing agile is implementing all the IQ stuff, and if your daily stand-ups and so on, but if people don't have the mindset to do so, the bodies will be in the room, but the mindset will not be there. And therefore, failure is there at risk. So if you bring that together, you can actually also see in the connection quotient, I say connection with yourself, the other, the team, organization, and the world. You can either look at it from a functional perspective or a relational perspective. Now, why is this important? I'm going to show you some examples here. And through the examples, hopefully, it becomes more and more clear what I'm talking about here. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to interrupt me, because I can talk for hours and days. So if you look at, like, in connection with yourself, coming from the functional or the relational angle, you actually start raising different questions. Now, I do hope that you say at the end of the day, because it's your end of the day, today you have been successful. I hope you have been successful, that you created the impact, the intended or even unintended impact, and that you can say, hi, I've been successful. But I also would love you to think about, but did it also fulfill you? Because you can do what you can do because you're good at it, but if it doesn't fulfill you, are you sure you want to continue doing so? So you see, it's about being successful, but it's also about being fulfilled. Probably you sometimes has to be quite resolute, quite firm, and say, like, these are the rules of agile. This is what I expect you to do. But are you also okay to be vulnerable? So when you get questions and you don't have the answer, is that okay for you? Or do you feel, no, I'm an agile coach, I should know this answer? And then you start making up your answer. Or can you say, good question, I don't have a clue. Let's find out together. That is a mindset. So that's not the doing part, that's the being part. And therefore, I also highly recommend that you do not only at the end of the day reflect on the day and reflect on the actions and the results that you created, but that you also do some introspection on where does it come from? Where did my behavior come from? What's the engine underneath here? So let me show you with an example, a personal example here. In order to do so, you need to know a little bit about my life. I'm 56 nowadays. And I always say there's two parts in my life. The first 35 years, and then from 36 onwards till, 56 at this point. Don't have a clue where it ends. But if you look at the first part of my life, I was living my life slightly different. My parents were divorced, and that had quite an impact. And to show you the impact, I'm going to show you a short video that represents my first 35 years. Now, as you can see, it's called Late for Work by 5secondfilms.com. That suggests that it will only be 5 seconds. And you guess what? It is only 5 seconds. So pay attention to my first 35 years. And by the way, you might say, that's my life. That's a coincidence then. Okay, so here we go. Oh, fuck! Bam. So again, like I said, if you recognize yourself every now and then that, you've been working hard, doing stuff constantly, actions list, task list, and at the end of the day, you fall asleep exhausted. The first 35 years, I was a bit like this. Why? Well, like I said, my parents are divorced. I'm by nature quite a vibrant guy. But when my parents divorced, around the age of 8, I noticed that relationship was not that good anymore. And by the age of 11, 12, my parents divorced, and it was with a clash, like a big clash. One of the things I haven't seen my father then for 8 years or so. I've got 3 brothers. 2 of them I haven't seen for at least 8 or 10 years. Actually, it's still a bit of a mess. One of my brothers, I don't see him at all anymore. So he's out of my life. He chose differently. The other brother, I see him only like maybe 2-3 times a year. So it even has impact right now, that whole divorce. And, for me, my strategy to cope with it was to go internally. So, I felt something like, and I only understand this nowadays afterwards while reflecting on my life. But I closed down. I said, like, I'm not going to cry. I'm going to be strong. And basically what I said, I'm closing everything. I don't feel anymore underneath. So I was just doing. And I taught myself, if I work hard, if I study hard, if I take on a lot of responsibilities, I will have a fantastic career. So I joined the military academy and I became a commissioned officer in the Air Force, ranked major at the age of 30, which is quite fast if you look at it from a career perspective. Then I moved on to Capgemini, and within Capgemini, within the year, they invited me into management roles. So from the doing part, I was doing quite well. I was creating the successes. I was doing all the hard work. I was creating the revenues and so on. And by doing so, I was having a wonderful career. I was having money, a nice house, 2 kids, a nice car. And that also made me feel like I'm successful, I'm happy, I belong, I'm okay. So constantly what I did is by doing all that, I got the external recognition. And by that external recognition, I defined myself by it. And it made me feel good. Now, the downside is you always need external recognition. You always need others to say you're okay. And that was something what was happening. That also meant like I didn't look inwards. And at some point I noticed like the way my life was evolving was not what I wanted it to be. Around the age of 30, 35, I started to reflect, like many people others, said like, is this what I want? I was married to Katie, and I knew she was not the one. I knew it within the year, but we stayed together for 30 years, having 2 beautiful kids. She gave me structure, she gave me love, she gave me also all the things that I needed to get, but she was not the one. And I knew, but I had not the courage to speak up and to say no. So it took me like 13 years to decide like we had to quit this relationship. Also, I was working hard and I was getting the results. So I was successful, but I felt like I was not fulfilled. I was drained at some point. And I remember one day my laptop crashed and I was driving to the office and to figure out that the office was closed because it was Saturday. So more and more, I felt like, I need to do something. And I started to work with my own coach. And my work coach asked me, so Marco, tell me, who are you? And I found it quite a tough question. Who are you? Just think about it. What would be your answer? Who are you? What would you say? Well, I can tell you what I did. I spoke more about all the things that I did. I spoke about like, I've been a commissioned officer in the Air Force. I was ranked major, and now I'm also a manager within Capgemini. And he said, yeah, that's all the things that you do, but who are you? Good question. What do you mean? Well, actually, of course, what he was referring to, if you take the theory of the iceberg by McClelland, an iceberg is like visible. There's a visible part, like 15-20% is visible. The rest is non-visible. What is seen also in behavior, if you look at me right now, you can listen to me. You hear my words, you hear the intonation, you see my hands, my gestures, you see my face. That is all visible. So you can see actions, you can see behaviors, and you can see results. You are aware about the impact I create or do not create on you. That is all visible from your angle. But until the moment I spoke about the divorce of my parents, you were not aware about what was happening underneath. You don't know where my behavior comes from and my way of thinking and looking at life. Because that is all underneath the waterline. My behavior, my way of thinking is defined by how I was trained, my experiences, the way I've been raised by my parents, the way I've been raised at the military academy. I've learned about camaraderie, for instance, and taking responsibilities. It formed me as a human, as a person, and also how I show up in my day-to-day business. So what is hidden, and that's the same for you, is like all the things that are underneath the waterline. And guess what? That is part of your core engine. When someone slams the door, I can be angry at you because you slammed the door. And I can say, I'm angry because you slammed the door. But is that fair to be angry at you? You just slammed the door. The anger is my response to slamming the door. Now, the question is, where does it come from? And some people, they might understand that at some point, if you had parents and they were angry and they had a fight when they were younger and they were always slamming the doors, then someone slamming the door might be a trigger that is still within you. So it's not about the other person who's slamming the door. It's much more, I'm being triggered. For what reason? And therefore, what I say is, at the end of the day, I hope you do your reflections on your actions, your behaviors and results, but that you also take time to do your introspections on what is the core engine, what is happening underneath the waterline. So my coach was asking me, so who are you? He was not asking about what was happening above the waterline, but how do you define yourself underneath the waterline? And basically, he was actually saying, so who are you? Who do you want to be? How do you want to show up in life? What is that you want to have? And once you define it, now the question is, what will you do? And for me, that led to the decision. I want to also be a parent to my kids. Rather than work all days and in the evenings, I want to show up as a parent and also spend time. I want to leave a legacy. I want to also inspire them, not only people around me in the business, but also my kids. And therefore, it had to lead me to the choices. First choice was my divorce. And the second choice was to let go of my management roles. And to say what I'm truly passionate about is about people. And what I truly believe in is that we all have potential. And we create a safe space where people can show up and be their beautiful selves with all the strengths and their weaknesses, their strong points, but also the things that they don't know. If we can create a safe container, then what is possible? And that's what I said. I want to contribute to creating such environment. And therefore, I resigned as a manager and I started to build my own company, first as an independent. And we're now as a company with 4 partners, a beautiful group of people, and we do a lot of work in the Netherlands as well as international. So let me pause here. And just open the space for, give me some responses, like while you were listening to this story, what is opening up for you here? Anyone?
It's very powerful, just the vulnerability for you sharing that, but it really sets an example and helps us to experience that connection that you're describing. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you, Todd. And that's also what I believe in. We sometimes tend to work so much from the head that we are just walking heads with hands attached in order to produce. Yet we are humans. We have feelings and sensations. And once you feel, you sense it, then something else is possible. And then something else opens up. But do you dare to go there? That's the big question, of course. Yeah. Maybe one more. What's opening up for you while listening to the story here?
I think for me, Marco, is that we've talked about this before quite a lot, but I feel like in organizations, especially as being an agile coach, I think in any organization that you work in, there is so much pressure on building the right thing and doing the right thing and do it as fast as possible, that we often eliminate or even forget about the whole being part. But actually, like, especially this slide, to be fair, where you flip it around from doing into being, it enhances my belief that as an agile coach is often way more powerful and helpful to slow down and connect to a person before you start talking about daily stand-ups and retrospectives and sprints and iterations and plannings and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And Marcelo, I love what you're saying here. It's about slowing down. And that's a bit like what, do you dare to slow down? I think it's the American Navy SEALs who say slow is smooth and smooth is fast. So if you slow down, you can do it right the first time rather than trying to correct it afterwards. But the point is also with the IQ piece, if you want to change something, then the IQ piece is also safer. Either you implement it or you didn't. Either it works or it didn't. And therefore if the numbers, if you're as an organization, your numbers are not right, then you do some changes in the organization and hopefully within the month, you already start noticing the results. Whereas the investment in relationships is a long-term investment. But I know one thing for sure, you can implement all kinds of methodologies on a short term, but the competitors can actually also implement the same. Technology is something it's easy to be copied at some point. But what is truly hard to copy is the culture. If you can create an atmosphere of like smooth is fast, slow is smooth and smooth is fast. If you can create a culture of people who are willing to invest in a relationship and therefore also want to spend time and build on each other and grow each other, then you have something that has a competitive advantage that is really hard to copy, but it's a long-term investment. So let me just give you some more examples here. So if, for instance, that also means in the connection with the other, I hope you do not only talk about what are the goals that we're trying to implement here. And you should talk about goals, of course, you're there for a reason, you're hired for a reason. But let's also talk about what's the kind of relationship that we want to build together. How are we going to support each other? Also as an, Agile Auckland, it's good to have these kind of sessions, to learn. But also, how do we want to relate? How do we want to support each other? That is the relationship, not just only the goals that you want to reach. And I also love to play with words. If I were to ask someone, like, what is your ambition? Most people will come up with like, this is the kind of role I'm aiming for. This is the kind of company I want to build, which is much more a functional answer. But I challenge you. Instead of asking someone, what is your ambition? Next time, ask them, what is your dream? And you will see that suddenly also part of the answers will be much more about their personal lives. How do you want to spend lives also with their children or friends, or how they want to show up in life? So just by flipping the question from what is your ambition, which is much more an IQ functional word, to what is your dream, which is much more personal, you will get different answers. And therefore, we can even compliment or acknowledge people around us. And complimenting is much more, I can compliment you on what you're doing. So, Marcella, if I may use you, I can compliment you on organizing this event for the people who are here, to inspire them. So you're spending your time in order to, and you're investing your time to help others to get inspired. Job well done. But that also means if I compliment you on it, I compliment you for what you do. Now I could also acknowledge you. And acknowledgement is much more, I see you for who you are. And what I know is more so then I start looking at your competences and at your qualities. And then I could say, you're honest, you're sincere, you are supportive, you are emotional. You see, the definition of an acknowledgement is you are, and then you just phrase the quality that you see within the person. Now, what I know is if you compliment and it feels good, yeah, and you check with yourself, is that what I've done? Yeah, I've done it. Yeah, I've done good job. And therefore keep complimenting people because you make them aware that they are doing the right things. But by acknowledging, you also say, I see you for who you are. And that tends to go much more directly to the heart. And you can even combine them. I could say to you, Marcella, great job in organizing this event. And also, that you're spending your time to inspire people around you. You're so supportive. You're so honest. You're so caring. You see? Then you have a compliment and acknowledgement. And it has a different angle and a different impact again. And, in this case, we also need to keep in mind that each and every one, we all have our own icebergs. We all have our own past and histories, and therefore our own lens of how we look at reality. I will always say, if this is an object and someone from this angle looking at the object would say, oh, that's the number 3. But someone from this angle would define, no, it's not the 3, it's the letter M. And someone from this angle would actually debate that's the letter E, and from this one would debate it's the letter W. Why I bring this in is we all have our own icebergs. We all have our own past experiences and knowledge, the way we've been raised, our values, our beliefs, our fears, our needs, and so on. And therefore, we will all look at the same reality, yet through our own lens, and therefore we might all see something differently. That also means, like in interaction with the others, I always say, stay open and curious, raise questions. And what if we start listening to understand? I see so many people who are listening to fix or listening to reply. They wait for the pause and then they bring in their knowledge. But are you willing to truly listen to understand? And when at some point you feel like, I totally disagree with you, are you going for a debate? Or can you still stay curious and say, like, I totally have a different perspective. Let's talk about it because there's something for me to learn from your perspective here. And what helps is start looking for the truth, even if it's like a tiny bit of truth. The point is, once you find a tiny bit of truth, you will find more truth. But again, it starts with the mindset. Well, I'm also aware of time and I only have like 30 minutes left. So let me continue here. If you look at like the team organization, let's talk about structure, but let's keep in mind culture as well. Yeah, do implement processes. But I hope you also talk about ethics, because sometimes, you can follow the process. And from a process point of view, you might say, we've done the right thing. But from an ethical point of view, you might say it's not the best solution. And let's not only talk about profit, but also about happiness. So you see, again, by flipping around the functional and the relational, you see there are more sorts of questions opening up. And then, you might even talk about the energy. And, I'm not saying stress energy is wrong. One of my colleagues has done his PhD on team energy. And he showed a lot of research on energy. And stress energy is absolutely important. But if there's too much stress, it will lead to emotional exhaustion by 18% more. The performance will go down and the employee turnover will rise again. Whereas when you create an atmosphere where people can also work from passion, it will create commitment, client satisfaction, and the performance will rise. So again, I think as an agile coach, you're not just implementing procedures and methodologies. I think you're working a lot with the energy of the system. And part of it is like working with a human being rather than just a human doing. And finally, from the work perspective, you might say that's where my clients are, the employees are. But hey, let's also be fair. That's also society. How do you handle refugee questions? Or we can always look at like the world, that's where the raw materials are, and we have the consumption economy. But let's also talk about sustainability and a circular economy. Well, you can, of course, as an organization say, these are the procedures to implement it, but then it's not implemented by heart. The real distinction is when people say like, this is what I want to contribute to, when they are connected to themselves and what they feel like that they want to contribute to the world, again, which is a mindset. Now let's talk about that paradox, and then we come back to the questions. That's the question at the start, and your own answers in the chat. Here's the paradox. The paradox is that the functional and relational are absolutely equal. They are. If I would work with you, I only would come from the functional part. So I would just talk about the connection quotient. I would not do any personal interactions or reveal myself. It's just like a boring, like bum story. I'm not sure if you would stay here with me for 1 hour. If I would be a manager, people would actually leave if there's no emotional connect. Now, if we flip it around, if it would really interesting, like, yeah, it's quite personal, but you're not learning anything at all. I'm not sure if you would stay here for 1 hour, and if you would work together for, on a project together, but it doesn't lead anywhere. Probably I get fired, isn't it? And it makes sense because there needs to be a result. So therefore, I debate that the functional and the relational are absolutely equally important. At the same time, that's the paradox. They are not. And in order to go for it, I would say go back to the chat. So I'll take the chat here as well. And start looking at like, what are the elements, the attributes of the best performing team that you've been part of? And ask yourself the question, if you look at those attributes, are those primarily IQ, functional attributes, or EQ, relational attributes? Achieving our goals, of course, that is functional. But having fun, I would say that is absolutely EQ, the relational. And the learning, there might be functional learning as well. There needs to be a learning mindset. If we look at trust and joy and happiness, it's all EQ, it's all relational. Trust has both. Vulnerability is the EQ, it's a human dimension. Curiosity to know each other as more than just our role. That's a curiosity, that's a mindset, that's the EQ piece. A positive energy, I would say that's EQ again, relational. Shared goals is functional, thank you. Trust, again, both. Collaborative, well, I think collaborative mostly is a mindset, because you might have diversity, but if you don't use the diversity, you will not never get collaboration. So that's the mindset. We trust that each other will do our best possible. So there's a mindset. You see, in your answers, if you start looking, and I've raised this question to thousands of people and teams all over the world, typically what I will see is like 1/3 of the answers are the functional and 2/3 are the relational. And that's what I call the paradox. They are absolutely equally important. And we all experienced when we create a safe space where there's the openness, the transparency, where we can lean in and blend in, where we can trust and build on each other, then we create some magic that also leads to better results. If you look at Daniel Goleman, you probably have heard about Daniel Goleman, about his EQ work. He also says 1/3 is IQ, 2/3 is EQ work. You know what? In leadership position, high-level leadership positions, it's even like 15/85. And I would say, again, it's the paradox, because if you don't know how to read the numbers, or you don't know how to create a strategy, you're in trouble as well. So you need to have that functional part, but ultimately it all comes down to the EQ. And that's also the same in the agile coaching. If you look at, there's so many research that shows the importance of EQ. At some point, the agile coaches, you're all equally smart. So the differentiator is not like that you know more about the methodology, but why are some people more effective? Why are more people than the high performers? The research by Harvard Business School shows it is more about the EQ, the emotional intelligence. They know how to relate, how to build, to create that atmosphere. And there's even more. I'm just showing here like 4 examples, but there's so much more research that shows the importance of the EQ and how it differentiates. Also, Google has done the Search Inside Yourself program. It's now independent. You can also buy that book, Search Inside Yourself, where they implemented also mindfulness. And if you just look at the mindfulness, what they implemented, and meditation, they saw that the people were so much more effective. So there's a reason, to do so. How do you create your own energy? Where do you slow down yourself, either by meditation or mindfulness? It has so much tremendous power in it. So I would debate here that you, as an agile coach, maybe, although they are equal, maybe 1/3 of your work is the IQ work and 2/3 is the EQ work. So how do you also build that skill? How do you relate to people? And that all starts by the connection with yourself. That is my message here. So in summary, I would say the connection quotient, connection is not something we need to define. You feel when it's there, and you feel when it's not there. If you want to build it, it all starts with the connection with yourself. From there, the connection with the others, your team, your organization, and then the world, and maybe even the universe, who knows? Keep in mind that you are primarily a person and you have a function, you perform a role. It's not your identity. And the paradox is that although they are equally important, maybe it's much more about the mindset and the atmosphere that you create. And if you want to develop, it starts by raising yourself questions on all those different levels, both from the functional as well as the relational. But by raising questions, it also requires you that you are willing to listen to your own answers and to start acting on it. So in short, this is a beautiful phrase from Antonio Damasio. We are not thinking machines that feel, although some people think this way, but ultimately we are feeling machines that think. So get back to your senses. Sometimes I say, lose your mind and come to your senses. So in short, how to move forward, reflect on your actions, but do introspect on your engine. Be a human doing as well as a human being. If you want to lead, first start leading yourself. Work with the strengths, but also with vulnerability. Be active in diversity and inclusion. Ask for feedback, then act on it. You cannot do all the things, so focus on one thing and just start working with a coach, a mentor, or a peer to support your growth. And I believe by doing so, we can really create a different environment. We can create a society where we just build on each other and support each other, rather than just keeping each other small. And to showcase that final statement, and that is going to be my final piece, there's a short video called The Lost Generation by Jonathan Reed.
I am part of a lost generation and I refuse to believe that I can change the world. I realize this may be a shock, but happiness comes from within is a lie, and money will make me happy. So in 30 years, I will tell my children they are not the most important thing in my life. My employer will know that I have my priorities straight because work is more important than family. I tell you this, once upon a time, families stayed together. But this will not be true in my era. This is a quick fix society. Experts tell me 30 years from now, I will be celebrating the 10th anniversary of my divorce. I do not concede that I will live in a country of my own making. In the future, environmental destruction will be the norm. No longer can it be said that my peers and I care about this earth. It will be evident that my generation is apathetic and lethargic. It is foolish to presume that there is hope. And all of this will come true unless we choose to reverse it. There is hope. It is foolish to presume that my generation is apathetic and lethargic. It will be evident that my peers and I care about this earth. No longer can it be said that environmental destruction will be the norm. In the future, I will live in a country of my own making. I do not concede that 30 years from now, I will be celebrating the 10th anniversary of my divorce. Experts tell me this is a quick fix society, but this will not be true in my era. families stayed together once upon a time, I tell you this, family is more important than work. I have my priorities straight because my employer will know that they are not the most important thing in my life. So in 30 years, I will tell my children, money will make me happy is a lie, and true happiness comes from within. I realize this may be a shock, but I can change the world, and I refuse to believe that I am part of a lost generation.
So my question to you, do you consider yourself to be a human doing or a human being, or both? And are they equally important in your life or not? But I'll leave that up to you. Any questions, remarks, observations from your end?
I have a question. At the moment, New Zealand is facing a lot of layoffs. That means a lot of people are looking for new jobs, and luckily also some companies are still looking for talent. I always found that in a job interview, it's highly focused on your human doing part and less on the human being. It's kind of like fingers crossed that you fit our culture and let's find out. Do you have any tips in what kind of questions to ask if you're interviewing somebody to get more of their human being aspect, and also the other way around? Do you have any tips on how to implement what I am as a person into my job interview?
Yeah. You know, one of the things that I would certainly ask for is like, what are some of your defining moments in life? It is already interesting what people would call a defining moment. It might be something that is much more functional oriented or much more personal oriented. But defining moments are moments where people also make choices, from my perspective, make choices that fundamentally change on how they also show up. So I would always ask for defining moments and then just see what opens up from here. Now, if someone would also come up with defining moments which are much more functional oriented, I would also just be honest with them and say, like, so what I'm noticing that right now you're talking a lot about the functional elements. You know, by the way, I've seen your resume, and up to now, from what I've heard, I understand that you are capable in doing the job. But what I also would be interested is if you're a fit with our culture, and therefore I need to understand who you are and also what drives you in life. So I would be transparent and open with them, and from there also ask them to open up a little bit more about their personal lives. So I think ultimately what I'm talking about here is like, what is your mindset? In your preparation, you know, what people do in preparation, they think about what's the outcome. But I think we should also prepare ourselves from a mental perspective. So, you know, when doing a job interview, hopefully that also invites me that in advance, I will not only think about like, what are the good functional questions, but also what are the good relational questions. And by the way, how do I want to show up? Because if I ask people to be vulnerable, then the question is also, how do I create an atmosphere of vulnerability? And I believe that creating an atmosphere of vulnerability is also, what if I would also say a little bit like, you know, so we're going to have this interview. So here's a little bit about myself so that you get to know who's interviewing you. And what if I would not only tell a little bit about myself from a functional angle, but also a personal angle, right from the start? It will create an atmosphere, a different atmosphere, where also people again are invited in to also reveal a little bit more about themselves, because they will. Because if I showcase that, the interviewer will also go there. But that requires a mindset from my end. And therefore, I will say, when you prepare for the interview, do prepare from the functional perspective. Think about the questions that you want to ask, but also do a mental preparation and think about what is the energy that I want to create in this interview. And then you just start having that interview. And then magic will happen for sure in the interviews. Does it answer your question, Marcella?
Yes, definitely. Thank you.
I've got a quick question. Well, it might not be a quick question. I've got a question, Marco. How have you got any hacks, any shortcuts for encouraging that vulnerability that you're talking about with teams? and getting that psychological safety there a bit quicker.
Yeah. Well, Ziggy, I've done this exercise with the best team, and I can highly recommend using that same exercise with the teams that you're working with. Here's why: because it will immediately show like the attributes that are important to them. The good news is it's not about the theory, but the answers that they will give the team are their own answers. So we don't need to debate those answers anymore. And then from there, you can actually ask them. So if you look at the list, and you can actually make two lists, like, you know, one is the functional list, one is the relational list, and then you do a little bit of explanation on the IQ and the EQ. And then you can just ask, so if you reflect on this team, you know, on how you work together, do you recognize those attributes within your team? And then you suddenly start to talk about the essence. So that would be the hack that I would offer you.
Hi, Marco.
Yes.
I have a question from a little earlier. You had a slide where you were talking about our connection to others and then to teams and organizations and out to the rest of the world. And
Yeah.
you said something like that all of those other connections sort of spring from our connection with ourselves to begin with, which I really like, thanks. And I was curious, do you have any kind of approaches to or practices or anything well, to suggest, I suppose, really to strengthen or develop that kind of sense of connection with self?
Oh, Mike, I could talk for hours about that question. Here's also the suggestion, and I always feel that a bit somehow shy to say, but I would say buy the book, because in the book, what I've done in all the chapters, I've boiled down all the insights also from research into chapters that you can read in like 10 minutes, including a QR code to videos, including some statements, as well as including exercises that you can actually use yourself and implement either on yourself or the teams you work with. So there's a lot of exercises that can be done. That would be my answer for now, Mike.
That's great. Thank you. Thanks.
Yeah. Any others?
We had a question in the chat. Alok, do you want to get off mute and ask it yourself, or are you happy for me to ask it?
Hello, Marco. Sorry, I was trying to figure it out. I'm on phone, trying to balance life and work as we were talking about. My question is, how do we encourage our organization, which is going to transformational changes? Like, I work for a traditional organization, been there for 30, 40 years. We are adopting agile methodology, but not the mindset. It's a struggle coming from an agile mindset. I'm a tester by occupation, and I joined in automation space. I understand what I'm doing, but I don't get the capability to do that. And it's very hard to reach out to management and say that, hey, we're all doing our best, but we're not doing the agile way. So how do we encourage our organization to utilize agile coach so we're all in good space and exactly adapt what you said?
Yeah. So first of all, what I would say, it's never about agility. Because you don't implement agility, you know, ultimately agility is a way to support, to get the organization in a certain shape. So what I talk about is always about impact. What's the impact that you want to create? What's the kind of organization? So what is your vision on, you know, where do you go and for what reasons? I think that's the starting point. And then the question is now, how can also agility and a methodology support that vision and that impact? So I would also always have that conversation with the managers about what's the kind of impact that you want to create within your team or within the organization, and what's the intended and what's the unintended impact, and what is that you're observing right now about what's happening, what's the impact, you know, through all the things that we're trying to do, what's the impact of all those changes, and is it also in line with what you have your vision around? And, you know, by making them aware about their vision and the impact that they intend versus the reality, that's where the gap shows up. So I would absolutely move away from agile, although that's the paradox, but agile is only at some point a way to answer how can we bridge the gap. And as long as they're not aware of the gap or not willing to bridge a gap, then you can push for agile, but then it's much more a functional push rather than an ask from them.
Thank you so much, Marco. Yes, it gave me insight how to reach out to them. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Any other questions for him?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm also aware of your time, Marco. So just see if there's any last question for Marco. All right, I will leave it with that then. Marco, thank you so much.
Hold on.
Yeah.
I said Beth also unmuted herself.
Right on the draw on that.
Oh, sorry.
No, it was totally my fault. Marco, here's one for you because it's one I run into quite a bit, and I have to admit, in all my years, I still don't have a good retort because to me, it seems so obvious, which is when you run into leadership teams and you're trying to get them to slow down, right, and get to know each other. I find this particularly happens at around the GM VP-ish line of things, right? No, we have annual planning and blah, 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 we need to get on with. And it's like, you guys have only just formed in the last few weeks or months. You need to spend time with each other. Have you found a good way to sell the belief of slow down and exchange as people? Because no matter how many times I say that, I don't seem to be able to sell that.
Yeah. No, I'm with you. I'm with you, Beth. The point is you cannot sell it. It's impossible. The only thing that you can do is you can create it. But it also needs a firm hand from your end. It also needs that I need to, if I take it from my perspective, that I need to have the courage to go beyond the comfort zone. That I also create an atmosphere where people will feel like uncomfortable, and I'll just keep them there. I'll just keep them there. I start raising some personal questions and I'll keep them there. But it requires me that I first open up, because they will not open up themselves. If you want to create vulnerability, you have to be vulnerable yourself first. Now, the question is, when you say, I find it hard to sell, is that like, do you mean in the pre-sales phase where you say like, I want to sell
So sorry, don't mean the word sell in a literal sense, right? As let's go with, if you're an independent contractor or consultant, right? And you're trying to explain what they're going to get on a value level. More when working as part of a permanent institutional team, right? But then you move to a new divisional area or whatnot, is actually trying to get them to understand that value of, yes, let's go with, especially since we're sitting here in early April, right? Yes, it's the start of the new fiscal year, but actually you don't know each other for a hole in your head.
Right.
Learn to know each other, right? Before we get to the business at hand.
So here's my trick.
Okay.
You've got to meet them where they are. If you meet people who are much more walking functional hats, you need to meet them as functional hats. So one way of doing it is, for me, for instance, we work with a methodology on team energy. It's scientifically researched, and it also, by a couple of questions, it shows the atmosphere that is within the team. The beauty is it creates data, which they love. So you give them data on how the team is performing on some angles. And from the data, you start having data conversations on the data. And by doing so, more and more, I try to seduce them into the more personal conversations. But if I want to do it right from the start and they're not ready and they're still in the functional, they're not going there. The second trick that I use is, I say, let's use a business example that is absolutely current, that you need to work on. So we start working on that business topic. And by having that conversation on the business topic, you start noticing like the atmosphere and how they interact. And then what I will do is at some point I say, hold on, slow down. And I start holding up the mirror to them, like, so what's happening in this space? So although they're working on the technology and on the business, I start taking them like, what's happening over here? You know, what's that interaction? But then I need to come from the mindset that I will speak my truth. I need to speak the truth about what is happening in the space. I need to name what's happening in the space. Now that will absolutely feel uncomfortable. And it needs to be done. But here's my perspective, Beth. I'd rather be fired for speaking up my truth instead of being fired for playing safe here. And again, that's the choice I'm making. And from there, I'll speak the truth, and people know, my clients know by doing so, and I'll take them. And so these are the two tricks that I use in order to start seducing, because that's what we're talking about, seducing, to go much more to the more personal levels.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Perfect. All right, Marco, thank you so much for being here. And I see like it's 7:15 already here in New Zealand. So that means we were hooked on what you were telling us. So thanks so much for sharing your knowledge and sharing your time and efforts. Really much appreciated. For everyone, I will share the recording as soon as I've edited, and I will also make sure that once I receive the slide deck from Marco, that I will share that as well. Will be on our YouTube channel and our Slack channels. I want to thank you all for being here. Thank you for your time. Marco, again, thanks so much for doing it. Really, really appreciate it.
Take care.
All right.
Have a lovely evening.
See you all soon.